The moment we are hurt, something shifts inside us, time slows, emotions spike, and the mind locks onto the pain. We replay the moment again and again, searching for meaning, blame, and justice. This is where revenge is born. Psychologically, hurt is not just emotional, it's biological. The brain detects threat, triggering anger as a defense mechanism. Pain demands a response, and the fastest response feels like retaliation. In that moment, revenge appears as balance, a way to restore dignity and control. The injury isn't only what happened, it's the feeling of being powerless, and the mind hates powerlessness more than pain itself. The brain doesn't crave revenge because it's cruel, it craves it because it's wired for survival. When we're wronged, the brain interprets it as a threat to status, safety, or identity. That threat activates reward circuits linked to dopamine, the same chemical behind pleasure and motivation. The idea of payback promises relief, power, and emotional balance. Even imagining revenge can feel satisfying, because the brain mistakes anticipation for resolution. But this craving isn't about justice, it's about control. Revenge offers the illusion that we can undo harm by inflicting it back, even when the damage is already done. Revenge feels like relief because it promises emotional release. After being hurt, anger builds pressure inside the mind, demanding an outlet. Revenge offers a story where pain transforms into action, and action feels empowering. For a brief moment, it quiets helplessness and replaces it with movement. Psychologically, this relief mimics healing. Even though nothing has truly been repaired, the brain registers the act as progress, mistaking intensity for resolution. But this relief is temporary. Once the emotional surge fades, the original wound often remains, sometimes deeper than before. Revenge doesn't remove pain, it distracts from it, just long enough to feel convincing. Revenge often disguises itself as closure. The mind tells us that once we strike back, the story will finally end. Psychologically, humans crave clean endings, especially after emotional chaos. Revenge promises a full stop where there is only an open wound. But closure doesn't come from retaliation, it comes from understanding and acceptance. When revenge is taken, the brain stays alert, scanning for new threats, new injustices, new reasons to stay angry. Instead of ending the story, revenge rewrites it with a sequel. The conflict remains alive, replayed in memory and emotion. What feels like closure is often just the beginning of a longer psychological loop. Memory is not a passive recording, it's an active force. When we're hurt, the brain stores the event with emotional intensity, replaying it as a warning. Each replay strengthens the memory, sharpening details, emotions, and imagined outcomes. This is rumination, the mind revisiting pain, not to heal, but to stay prepared. Unfortunately, the brain can't always tell the difference between remembering and reliving. Every mental replay reactivates the same emotional response, keeping the wound fresh. Revenge feeds on this loop. As long as the memory stays vivid and unresolved, the desire for payback feels justified, even necessary, making it harder to move forward without letting go of the story itself. When we're hurt, ego steps in to protect our sense of worth. Revenge becomes less about the original pain and more about restoring pride. The mind frames the situation as a contest, someone won, and we lost. Psychologically, losing feels threatening to identity, especially when humiliation or disrespect is involved. Revenge promises to flip the scoreboard, to prove strength instead of weakness. This need to win can overpower logic and empathy, narrowing focus to dominance and validation. But when ego drives revenge, the goal isn't healing, it's image repair. And chasing that victory often traps us in endless comparison, conflict, and emotional exhaustion. Anger fuels revenge, but rumination keeps it alive. Anger is a burst of energy meant to protect us, yet when we replay the hurt repeatedly, that energy never fades. The mind circles the same thoughts, imagining confrontations, rewriting outcomes, and reliving insults. This mental loop strengthens emotional intensity instead of releasing it. Psychologically, rumination convinces us we're solving a problem, when we're actually deepening it. Each replay reinforces anger, making it feel justified and necessary. Over time, anger stops being a reaction and becomes a habit, and as long as the mind keeps returning to the wound, revenge feels like the only way to finally quiet the noise. Forgiveness feels unnatural because the brain equates hurt with threat. Letting go means lowering defenses, admitting vulnerability, and releasing the imagined control that revenge promises. Psychologically, holding on to anger gives a false sense of power, while forgiveness requires trust that harm won't repeat. It demands emotional effort without guaranteed reward, which the brain instinctively resists. Even when we intellectually understand it's healthier, emotionally it feels risky. The instinct to protect oneself and restore status overrides rational choice. That's why, for many, revenge feels easier, more satisfying, and more natural than forgiveness, even though it prolongs pain and traps the mind in a relentless cycle. Social media has transformed revenge from private to public. Every insult, betrayal, or slight can now be broadcast instantly, amplified, and witnessed by thousands or millions. The brain responds to this visibility with a surge of validation. Likes, shares, and comments feel like proof of power. Public revenge becomes a performance, feeding ego while reinforcing anger. Yet the cost is constant exposure, rumination, and escalation. Each post keeps the wound alive, each reaction prolongs the emotional loop. Social media doesn't just magnify revenge, it traps the mind in an endless cycle of attention, justification, and the fleeting satisfaction of being seen in retaliation. For some, revenge stops being an action and becomes an identity. The mind begins to define itself by the wrongs suffered and the retaliation planned or executed. Every thought, conversation, and choice is filtered through the lens of payback. Anger becomes a core part of self, pride tied to perceived victories, and every interaction reinforces the narrative. Psychologically, this creates a feedback loop. The more revenge shapes identity, the harder it is to let go. Life becomes measured by past wounds and future payback rather than growth or healing. When revenge defines who we are, moving forward feels impossible, and the cycle continues endlessly. Revenge is addictive because it triggers the brain's dopamine system. Just imagining payback, plotting it, or seeing the person suffer sparks a small rush of pleasure, like a reward. This dopamine release reinforces the behavior, making the mind crave repetition. Each act of imagined or actual retaliation creates a feedback loop. Anticipation feels satisfying, even before the harm is done. Psychologically, the brain mistakes this chemical reward for progress or resolution, trapping us in cycles of anger and obsession. Over time, the desire for payback becomes less about justice and more about chasing that brief, intoxicating feeling of satisfaction. Revenge rarely brings the satisfaction we expect. The initial surge of anger and anticipation may feel powerful, but once action is taken, the relief is fleeting. The original hurt remains, and new guilt, regret, or complications often arise. Psychologically, the brain craves a permanent sense of justice or closure, which revenge cannot provide. Instead, it creates a cycle of temporary highs followed by lingering dissatisfaction. Each act of retaliation may even deepen the emotional wound, reinforcing anger and resentment. The more we pursue revenge, the more we realize that the payoff never matches the effort, leaving the mind trapped in a loop it cannot escape. The pursuit of revenge does more damage than we often realize. While we focus on the target, our own mind suffers in silence. Chronic anger, stress, and rumination erode mental health, increasing anxiety, depression, and even physical strain. Relationship strain as obsession colors every interaction, isolating us from support and empathy. Our perspective narrows, making forgiveness, joy, and growth harder to access. Psychologically, revenge hijacks attention and energy, keeping the brain locked on past pain instead of the present or future. The harm isn't always visible to others, but it quietly reshapes our mind, emotions, and life long after the act itself. Revenge often feels like power and control, a way to rewrite events and assert dominance over those who hurt us. Psychologically, it gives the illusion that we can fix the past, balance the scales, and restore pride. Yet true control comes not from retaliation, but from letting go. Releasing the need for payback frees the mind from obsessive loops, anger, and rumination. It is not weakness, it is mastery over emotion. By choosing to let go, we reclaim focus, peace, and perspective. Power shifts inward, no longer dependent on someone else's actions, and the mind begins to heal. The only way revenge truly ends is by releasing it. Holding on keeps the mind trapped in anger, rumination, and imagined payback, endlessly replaying the hurt. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or excusing the wrong, it means reclaiming control over your own emotions. Forgiveness, self-reflection, and perspective break the cycle, freeing the brain from the dopamine trap of retaliation. Only when we stop feeding the fire of revenge can peace take root. True resolution comes from within, not from anyone else. Loudspeaker. If you want to explore more fascinating psychological insights, subscribe now for more psychological documentaries.